This is Office Talk with Annette Stepanian. Welcome back to another episode of Office Talk, you guys. Thank you so much for listening as always. And I'm actually really excited about this episode because it's something a little bit different. I haven't done this before, but I've been preparing for a presentation that I'm giving to folks in the wedding industry. And I thought it would be really cool to kind of plug in some statistics, kind of get a sense of where things are headed. And so whether, again, you're in the wedding industry or not, I think it's really important to keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening. As we know, industries are changing rapidly, and it's important to educate and invest in ourselves and in our businesses. And that was a topic I talked about in episode 83. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that, go back and make sure to listen to the 3 investments that I think all business owners need to be making in their business. Now, you probably know that I work with a lot of folks in the wedding industry, so I'm always trying to keep up with what's going on, kind of keeping that industry on my radar. And it's amazing to me how much things have changed in the last few years, even from when I planned my wedding, and that was only a few short years ago. So today I'm going to be talking about the state of the wedding industry and some key takeaways that you're going to want to keep in mind as you're planning out 2019 and beyond. Now, the information and the stats that I'm going to be talking about here, I took those from the 2018 Wedding Wire report. Now, if you're not familiar with this Wedding Wire report, I'm going to link to it in the show notes, but it's a report that Wedding Wire puts out year after year, and I think they do a really great job of talking about what's trending in the wedding industry. Where are couples spending money? Where aren't they spending money? How are they planning their weddings? And so some things are come as no surprise, but some things very interesting insights. Now, I'm a big believer in educating yourself, and the more you know, the more you're going to be able to hone in on your marketing. You're going to understand how to identify your clients and how to better serve them, because you're going to figure out, well, what's important? What are they really looking for? And how can I tailor my services to meet that need? Throughout this episode, I'm going to share some of those stats, and I'm going to share some key takeaways. So these are things that when I look at the numbers, when I look at what this report is saying, if I were a business owner that was in the wedding industry, these are the questions I would be asking myself and trying to find answers to in order to improve my business. It probably comes as no surprise to you that 83% of wedding planning is done online, and about half of that is done on mobile and half is done on desktop. When looking online, prospective customers are looking at wedding-related websites first. Then they're doing online searches, then Pinterest, then wedding shows and expos, then Facebook, in that order. Now, what does this mean for you? If they're looking at wedding-related websites first, you want to see if you can get on those wedding-related websites. So a lot of these websites offer paid listings or advertising opportunities where you could have your name, your business name, put in as part of their directory. So you might want to inquire into that and see if it makes sense for you to advertise on some of those websites. When it comes to online searches, if you don't have a quality online presence, let's get that fixed. This is 2018, you guys. So if your website has been kind of lacking the last few months, maybe you've totally neglected it, give it a facelift. Get some quality content on there. Get some examples of your work on there so that folks can find you. This includes adding some good SEO. And in fact, we have a great episode about SEO. I'm going to link it into the show notes so you can get an introduction to that topic if you're not already familiar with it. Other things that kind of jumps out at me when I read the statistic is that if 83% of wedding planning is done online, that means nobody is getting on the phone with each other. I mean, that's very, very rare, right? When was the last time that you got on the phone with somebody you wanted to hire, at least at the initial stages? You probably went to their website, you kind of got a sense of who they were, what kind of services they offered, if they were within your budget or not, and then you sent in a contact form to get some more information. In thinking about your website design, make sure it's super simple and clear in terms of how to get in touch with you. And when someone does get in touch with you, you want to have systems in place in order to respond in a timely and efficient manner. Obviously, social media presence is super important, as the report indicates. Now, while Pinterest and Facebook are the social media sites most frequently used for wedding planning, couples utilize Pinterest 2 times more than any other social channel for inspiration. That's huge. And it makes sense. I mean, Pinterest is where we all go to get inspired for different ideas, for different recipes, right? So if Pinterest is such a huge driver, I'm hoping you have a nice, solid presence on Pinterest and maybe look into some of their paid advertising options to increase your visibility. Now, when doing the research, the report notes that the top 5 biggest challenges that couples face when planning their wedding include determining the budget and guest size, making decisions, keeping track of expenses, knowing you're on the right track with planning, and finding vendors. So those to me, I mean, they're giving it to you here. That to me is great content that you can create on that brand spanking fancy professional website that you're going to have, if you don't already, that can help generate potential leads, can get you into that SEO world and get all that stuff working magically. So when people are running these online searches, they'll find you when they come across one of your great blog posts or videos that you've created. These are also things I know that they're worried about. They're having problems with this. So when I get a potential lead inquiry, maybe I tailor the things that I talk about to address some of these concerns. Or even in the customer and client experience, maybe these are things I create resources for them. Or maybe this is a service I provide for them. Maybe, let's say you're a wedding planner. Maybe you keep track of their expenses so they don't have to, right? So this is huge to me in this one little section. You know exactly what their fears and concerns are and their challenges are. And you could address that in terms of your content on your website, the content you create on your social media. You can address that in terms of your inquiry responses. You can address that also in your client experience and the services that you provide. Now, what was really interesting to me is the sequence of vendor research. They even break that down. Venues come in first, with then wedding planning, catering, photography, the dress, the DJ, the band, the videography, flowers, and so on and so forth. So to me, when I take a look at that, if I'm in the wedding industry, I'm looking at some key vendor partnerships that I want to create. If the venue is such an important and first initial place where they research, you want to see, can you create some sort of partnership? Can you get on a preferred vendor list? Maybe that venue has some sort of booklet that they give, that they send out to, inquiries, or something on their website where they link out to other potential vendors. You want to start creating those relationships and having your business name appear there, because that is where a lot of these couples are going first with their research. Now, what I really love digging into was when hiring vendors, couples tend to search for and even book their venue before hiring a wedding planner. I don't know, that just sounded really interesting to me, because to me, when I got married, I wanted to hire the wedding planner to help me find the venue, because I knew I could rely on her experience to look at, like, okay, what do I need to be thinking about for a wedding day? So that was really interesting to me. Now, if you are a wedding vendor, again, if you know that the venues are getting booked before they're hiring some of these other vendors, again, you want to see, can I have relationships with some of these venues now, right? Because that's going to be a really great referral source for you. So could you imagine, after a couple books a venue, they mention to the venue manager that they're going to be working with a wedding planner, or they're looking for a great photographer or whatnot? What if the manager already had you on top of her list of referrals and handed a little booklet to the client and said, hey, these are the top 3 vendors you need to look into and book? That would be amazing, right? You didn't even have to do anything. You didn't have to spend $1 on advertising. What I think is really interesting about the events industry is, in my opinion, you're constantly auditioning for your next role. And what I mean by that is, when you are at an event and you're executing on that event, there are guests there who might become future clients. There's the venue management that is kind of taking stock of all the different vendors and who they might want and might not want to work with in the future. And there are the other vendors, right? So if you're a florist, and you have a really great experience with a rental company, you're probably going to form a relationship there and do work together in the future. So you're always looking, or should be looking, at how to build those relationships, and then potentially how that can then turn into a source of future business for you. Now, when looking for vendors, the report indicates that price and availability are the top considerations. Okay, availability, obviously that makes sense. If you as a vendor in the events industry are booked on a certain date, you can't take on the job. But price, and I know that's a sensitive topic for a lot of people. We would like to think that people aren't doing price comparison shopping and going solely on price, but they are. I know this is a great debate. Sometimes people say don't put your prices on your website. Some people will put a range. Clearly, that's a personal decision for you, but having the pricing on your website, at the very least, some sort of starting at, is going to help weed out couples who aren't going to be a good fit for you, at least in terms of their budget. Also, because pricing is a consideration and a top consideration for couples, you want to start thinking about, well, how do I move these people away from just focusing on pricing, and how can I communicate my value of what I do as a wedding vendor? And try and tailor those conversations, whether it's your response to one of their inquiry forms, whether you maybe are one of the few people who actually manage to get them on the phone. You want to start tailoring those conversations and giving them more information about the value that you're delivering. The report also dives into popular dates to pop the question. The top engagement dates tend to be around Christmas and New Year's, and of course, Valentine's Day. Now, if I was in the wedding industry, I would think, okay, that's really interesting. That's when I'm going to start seeing a lot of inquiries coming through. Maybe that's when I start running some advertising. That's when I start doing something to reach out to potential clients. The report also goes into the most popular wedding dates. And again, I love this because I start thinking about all the beautiful weddings that are happening. So 72% of weddings are occurring between May through October. Now, traditionally, it says that the spring was a peak wedding season, but they're starting to see a shift towards fall months, with 38% of the weddings happening during the fall season. This tells me a lot. This tells me, A, I probably can't take a vacation during the fall months because I'm probably going to be really busy, hopefully, right? It tells me that, okay, I know that in the spring and May to October, that's my busy season. So what can I do in terms of getting extra support, getting assistance, getting whatever I need in order to make sure that I'm not walking around like a chicken with its head cut off, right? I want to be super organized and make sure I have the systems and the people and the processes in place to make sure that I can deliver on the contracts that I've signed. This is also telling me that it's probably going to be slow during the winter months. So in terms of cash flow, right, that's a huge thing for folks in the wedding industry because it can have this very seasonal impact. So you want to start planning in terms of your cash flow. Well, you don't want it to be feast or famine. So how do I structure my payments? How do I structure the contracts in a way where I'm not falling short or I'm not getting paid for a few months there? So that's stuff I'm going to be thinking about. Also, I know winter is going to slow down, so maybe that's the time where I look to reinvest in my business. That's when I can slow down and do some sort of planning, maybe take a look at my contracts, do all that kind of housekeeping stuff in order to prep myself for the next year. But remember, winter is also when a lot of people are getting engaged. So you can't slow down completely. You still want to be out there and doing what you need to do to bring in those potential leads. So in that year-long planning process, hopefully you're one of the vendors that they are hiring. The report also talks about the role of technology in the wedding planning process. It says that 36% send online save the dates and 62% create a wedding website. 52% will use a wedding planning app, and a lot of people now, over 50%, are generating a wedding hashtag. Now, let's say I was a wedding stationery designer. This is very interesting to me because I'm thinking, okay, 36% are sending online save the dates. It's still not the majority, but there's definitely that trend there. And I see they're creating a wedding website. Now, I don't know how many of these people are doing it themselves in terms of the couples or if they're hiring this out, but maybe that's a nice way to differentiate yourself as a stationery designer. Maybe that's an extra service that you provide or something that's included in your package so they don't have to do it. Don't just look at this data for what it is. Start thinking about, okay, if that's true, what does that mean for me? How can I generate some new ideas, some new services? How could I tweak the way in which I do things in order to address what's really happening nowadays, right? So let's not be afraid of the changes that are coming. Let's embrace them and add them and improve our systems. Another great stat, millennials make up about 80% of the couples who are getting married today. No surprise there. But more than 50% of millennials' parents are helping to pay for the wedding. That's a lot, I think, in my opinion. So what does this mean for you? You got to know that you're likely going to be communicating with both the couple and their parents who are paying for the wedding throughout the process. So you have to be mindful of the dynamics here. You've got to understand who your client is, and you've got to understand who the decision maker is when you're having the sales call. And then once you've booked them as a client, you want to be aware of these sensitivities. Have established boundaries about who is making the decision with and for your clients. This is important so there's no miscommunication here. And when you think about your messaging and the way you're communicating with your clients, consider that you're also communicating with two very different audiences who come from two different generations. Of the parents who are helping to pay for the wedding, 56% of them are using savings to finance the wedding, and 20% are using credit cards. Using savings or the credit card can't be an easy decision for some of these parents, I would suspect, but they want their children to have the best wedding that they can provide. So you want to exceed expectations here and try and be a good communicator, help them make the most of this investment that they're making. Really, they're making this financial investment in their children's happiness and their joy. Bear this in mind no matter how the wedding is being financed. In terms of the cost of weddings, on average, weddings are costing somewhere about $36,000, which includes the ring and includes the honeymoon. But 42% of folks say that they underestimate their budget. How many of us did that when we got married? Okay, I know we did. And so this is a very great way for you as an industry professional to educate your market. Most people haven't planned a wedding before, right? So they don't know what the cost of any of this stuff looks like, and they don't know what's reasonable and what's not. And so it's an important opportunity for you, especially if you're a planner, to educate your clientele on what things cost, what's a good investment, where should they be spending their money, where can they cut back and save. Now, 1/3 of the total budget ends up going towards venue and catering, and they even have a breakdown of the cost by wedding vendor. Venue and catering, that's where a lot of the money is going. But then the rest of the money is going towards band, photography, the rehearsal dinner, videography, the wedding rings, event rentals, wedding planning, the dress and the flowers, and the list goes on and on and on. So you can kind of get a sense of where are couples prioritizing different services and where they're actually putting their hard-earned dollars towards that. Now, what came really shocking to me was the average cost of wedding planning. For the last, in 2017 and 2016, the average cost was $1,700. In 2015, it was $1,600. That's bananas to me. I mean, if you're doing full coordination for a wedding and you're only getting paid $1,700 to do a year's worth of work, I don't know what's going on here. Maybe this data is only taking into consideration day of coordination. I don't know enough about it, but I see a huge red flag here because to charge $1,700 for a year's worth of work, there's a disconnect here. So as a wedding planner, for instance, I think you have to really emphasize the value that you're bringing to the wedding planning process, how you're educating your client on where to save money, how to spend their money. And so I think there's a huge opportunity here for wedding planners to bump that number up on average to more than $1,700. I encourage you to take a look at this Wedding Wire report. I know we're at the end of 2018, and I'm sure next year they'll come out with a brand spanking new one. But it is very interesting, at least for me, as you could tell from the enthusiasm in my voice. This isn't a comprehensive list, and you might come up with your own takeaways, right? And your own interpretations of this data. If you aren't in the wedding industry, I would love for you to Google around and see, is there a similar report out there for your industry, and kind of get a sense of where are things going. And I think when there is change and sometimes we see these hard numbers that we don't necessarily love, like I don't love seeing that wedding planners are getting paid on average $1,700. Let's not argue with the data, let's work with it. I would love if you took a look at whatever report you find for your industry, and for each data point, think about, well, what could I do with this? How can I make my business better? What opportunities are there? What services can I add? What should I take away? Let's work with what we have and let's make it even better. Of course, I tell you all of this so you can take action in your business. Reading these reports, they're fun. It's fun to have these stats in your head, but knowledge isn't really powerful unless you do something about it. So I would love for you to head on over to my Facebook page and let me know what's one big takeaway you have from this episode. Was there a stat that I mentioned that was super surprising? Is there a change you're going to make in your business in order to keep up with the trends? Let me know over on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Annette Stepanian ESQ. And I've added a link to the show notes in case you don't want to remember all of that. Just head on over to the show notes and link on over to the Facebook page and let me know. Okay, with that said, we're going to wrap this up, and I'll be back next week with a brand new episode of Office Talk. Thank you so much for listening.